I have this memory of my mom going through the newspaper and cutting coupons basically every Sunday, kind of religiously, and that everything we bought was on some kind of sale or discount. Yeah, the biggest money success is an easy one. I helped my coworker save like $30,000. I would have started by telling him to be a little bit braver, right? And some of that is about recognizing what position I was in, and with my expenses as low as they were, that I could have afforded to take a risk at that time.
Hi Dream Seekers! Today we have a very special guest, Vivek Doshi. Vivek grew up on the East Coast and graduated from Duke University. After a 6.5 years career as research and development engineer, he decided to start a new chapter of his life, devoting his time to things that he truly values. He is now the board president of the Chicago Tour Library, a nonprofit organization serving a community of 1,400 active members and rapidly growing. Let's welcome Vivek. Hi Vivek, thank you for being on my show. How's it going there in Chicago?
It's good. It's a really busy time, but we're getting the last bits of good weather, so trying to soak that up.
Perfect. I like the weather in Chicago, so nothing to complain.
I think it feels a little more special here because we get so little of it.
Oh, yeah, the summer and early fall. Well, enjoy it while you can. So, like always, I'd like to start knowing some childhood story of my guests. Do you mind sharing a little bit of your childhood memory of money?
No, not at all. I have two memories that are the most front of mind for me, and I have a really bad memory, so bear that in mind. But I have this memory of my mom going through the newspaper and cutting coupons basically every Sunday, kind of religiously, and that everything we bought was on some kind of sale or discount. But on the other side of that, I have memories of being at a wedding in India with all my family members, sitting around playing cards, gambling, and how that through line of gambling continued well into my early 20s. It's just something that most of the men in my family did. And it doesn't really make a lot of sense given how hard they scraped to keep their money. Beyond just gambling with family, they would also gamble at casinos. And so there's a little bit of a disconnect there that I don't think I fully figured out until I got a lot older.
Okay. Would you say that's like a typical thing in your culture, or is it just a personal thing?
I don't really know. It's certainly true in my family. But I think one of the challenges is knowing the difference between what's normal for a Doshi and what's normal for Indians writ large. I think that there are definitely some comedians who will talk about Gujaratis, which is the state that both my parents are from, being especially cheap. But I don't really know if the gambling part is cross-cultural.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. So I'd like to follow up on where you think your mom was like clipping coupons and that. Do you think that translated in your later habits in life, or what did your parents teach about, saving and investing?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about money a lot. I don't know if this is true for other families, but we didn't talk about investing until fairly late, into high school and college. But the value of just always trying to optimize for money, right? And, maximize the amount that you can get or the quality or whatever it is, that you kind of saw that in every aspect of the way we grew up, right? Mm-hmm. Discount shopping and, interestingly, credit cards were a really big part of our family because of the points and the rewards you could get. So, I mean, we were never drawing or keeping a balance, but it was, that was just another way for my family to try to stretch the dollars. So much so to the point that I didn't realize until much, much later in my life that we were financially privileged, because that's just not the way we spent or the way we move through the world. Somewhat in some ways to our detriment, I think.
So what time did you become aware that you have the assets available?
I think it was probably right around college. It became very clear after college how much privilege we had, right? Like I was always kind of aware how much my parents made, and it was something that they talked about, but also like not realizing how much they had put away
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of assets they had.
Mm-hmm.
Because it didn't, for them, the behaviors never changed. It's not like they got to some point and then they decided like, okay, we've reached our goal and now we can start to live a little more freely.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even to this day, my mom and dad are both still really making choices that optimize for money and not their happiness or ease of life. And I mean, I do the same thing.
Can you tell me a little bit about, you used to be frugal and at some point you realize you actually have a lot of assets, then, available through your family, like how did that change your plan or behavior or relationship to money?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could say that it changed it like fully and that I have this new outlook on life and have a perfect balance, but that's absolutely not true. I, so I have the part of them that optimizes for money, right? That really just tries to make every dollar go. And then occasionally I recognize this issue. And so then I will be a little bit more free with my money, both to be kinder to myself and then also to give more freely to say like charitable organizations, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
or friends, as opposed to being so regimented.
Mm-hmm.
But interestingly, I think I'm more like them than I am dissimilar to them. And so I still, when I'm not thinking about it consciously, my default is to optimize for money, is to save money, is to try to be cost conscious.
Wow. I mean, that's just to show like how much of the childhood memory impacts our behavior, even though we learn things and we have, other financial knowledge. But I also want to recognize that being financially vigilant, the point of saving is actually protective of wealth in general. So I guess that's a blessing from your family that you learned very early on in age.
Yeah. I mean, I think the challenge I face, right, is that wealth has to serve some purpose, in my view,
Mm-hmm.
right? Wealth to just for wealth's sake is kind of useless. And I think I have this recognition, right, that money is a tool. And so if we're just leaving it in the toolbox, what's the point, right? And
Yep.
so that's where I think this challenge really comes in. And so some days I win that battle and I make the right choice, and some days I don't.
That's interesting because I also know that you made a very significant career change from, you had a very good education from Duke University, and then you were an engineer for 6 years and also got promotions during those time. And then you made a big decision to leave the corporate America and devote your time on things that you actually value. Can you tell me a little bit more about how that transition happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit messier than I think you laid it out, which is, when I left my job, my plan was to just go to another job, right? Maybe take 2 or 3 months in between. Originally, I was actually looking for a job so that I could have a very small gap, right? So that I would have a job in hand before I left my previous one. Um, but I mean, I left my job for for people who have money or have stability, I should say, for the common reasons, right? It was no longer challenging. It was no longer interesting for me. And, I was looking for a new challenge. And so I left that. And actually, what ended up happening is it's the fact that there was a job or a work, I should say, that aligned with my values is what got me back into working. So, spending time at the tool library, seeing how much it aligned with my values was something that got me to activate again and to really dedicate time and effort and skills to a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I think, given my personal savings and my low spend rate, I could have just kind of continued on, just kind of milling about. And I think that might have happened
Mm-hmm.
if not for something like this. And so now I'm doing it essentially full time, and just learning as much as I can about this field and this kind of space that is very new to me.
Would you would you be able to compare like a typical day working in your previous job and a typical day at your library?
Uh, the thing that they share is they're both really varied. So at my old job, I wasn't just doing tool design or something. I was doing ideation, design, implementation, testing, report writing, presentations. I once planned a conference somehow. You know, it was just a weird mix of being a pretty small department within a very large organization. And I think the thing that that shares with the tool library is, I mean, we have half of a full-time employee, and a bunch of really dedicated volunteers and just a lot of random things that need to get done. You know, one day it might be shipping something or repairing a tool or interacting with members, and then there's the whole back end side of it, the systems that you have to create, policies and fundraising. So,
Yeah.
but I was rarely ever working at midnight in my sweatpants for my old job.
So you're actually working more hours now. Is that what you're saying?
No, not necessarily. Just the times are different, right? Because I have essentially complete flexibility outside of when the library is open
Yeah.
to do all this, back of house work. And the deadlines are a little bit more amorphous. The deadlines are, if I'm able to get this thing done, we might grow a little more quickly, or we might have structures a little bit more in place. Whereas at a mega corporation like the one I was at, a lot of that's already in place. And so then the deadlines end up being the thing that dictate your work.
Interesting. I hear a lot more ownership now that you have to make your own decisions and try to motivate yourself. So you mentioned a lot about values. Like, what are your like top values and how did they form?
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me the spoiler that you were going to ask this question, because it would have taken me a really long time. So what I came to was um, like self-awareness as the first one, and intentionality, and some version of kindness, right? And actually, I think the flow is probably a little better. Intentionality being thoughtful about things, about recognizing the impacts of your actions and your words and the plans you make. And then the self-awareness part comes in because inevitably we're going to make mistakes. And so being able to see that, not take it personally, but try to implement change, try to become better and learn from those mistakes. And then the kindness, I mean, that's what dictates everything, right? If your intention is to be a jerk, well, then that kind of defeats the purpose.
I mean, in deep inside, I believe everybody's kind. Like, we want to be kind to others. We want to treat it kindly as well. So I believe like I'm pretty much like share the same value as you do. Because if for some reason, if we are like more capable or we get lucky and we have more resources available, then we should help the other people to achieve their full potential as well. So that I think we have in common. Do you think those value has been with you the entire time, or has it changed over time?
Um, I think to some extent they've been with me for a long time, but I think the thing that's changed is how ironically how intentional I'm being about doing things and learning with regard to my values, right? So there might have been a time where, say, someone would say something, and you get that feeling like that doesn't feel quite right. That feels hurtful or wrong or something, but it wasn't directed at me, so maybe you wouldn't say anything, or maybe you wouldn't think about it anymore. I think what's changed now is the sense of responsibility I feel to be a much more active representative of those things, of the things I believe in the spaces that I'm in. And so, and I have a lot of awesome people in my life who've showed me what that looks like. I think one of the things that comes with privilege is the luxury to not have to think about these things, and that it requires time and effort to sink back in, to think about it more, and to see what it looks like to actually execute on those values, right? And when you're faced with that thing where it's like, that I'm doing something that's incongruent. Am I going to make that change or not? And I think
Mhm.
before that might have been a lot less likely. I mean, it's not perfect now either, but um, it's the process I think is a lot more robust.
Mhm. Wow, that's so powerful. I think a lot of people get. I think for myself, for example, like there are so many things that needs to be done in a certain day, and a lot of times I just don't have the time to think about the implication and the impact. But it's it's it is a luxury, as you said, like to have the freedom to think about what you want to do, what you want to exemplify in your entire life with all that time. That's pretty powerful.
And I mean, to be 100% like transparent, I think it's also important to remember that not every decision is a high leverage point, right? You know, yeah, if you buy whatever organic X, Y, or Z versus conventionally,
Hmm.
that of course it matters, right? But it doesn't necessarily matter enough to relative to the brain space that it
Hmm.
takes up. I speaking about money, like I have found myself sitting in the grocery store in an aisle comparing two packages of toilet paper for like 15 minutes, trying to decide which one to pick. And it's like, that's not a good use of my time. Right. And so
Exactly.
like it's, but I think you have to, you have to find whatever that balance is. And I
Hmm.
think that generally like you tend to believe everyone's kind. I also tend to believe most people are doing the best they can, even
I
if that
totally
isn't
agree.
good, even if there are harms that come from that, some days you're gonna make that win and some days you're not, as far as the choices you make.
Hmm. Yeah. Can we shift gears a little bit? Like, what's your biggest money success and money failure?
Yeah, the biggest money success is an easy one. I helped my coworker save like $30,000 on his payments by kind of just figuring out that he was underpaying his student loans relative to the income he was making, and knowing there's time value of money and
Hmm.
investments and all that. But the thing that was key here was realizing that that is not something he wanted to do. Right, he wasn't comfortable with investments in a traditional sense, and so this was a way essentially for him to invest in a way that he was comfortable with. Right, and like he had a certain huge amount of money sitting in the bank that he needed for X, Y, or Z purpose, and
Hmm.
so I was able to help him figure out like this is going to be a better net balance for you. And that it was pretty easy. It was it's a couple spreadsheets, and he was very amenable to it, which helps. But um, that felt really good, of just being like, okay, all this time I spent worrying about money and figuring out how to deal with money
Hmm.
coming into to benefit someone else.
Wow.
So that's an easy win.
Hmm. And what about money failure?
Money failures, those those are on the regular, and most often it's just overly optimizing for money. I think, and having it have really negative effects on my life.
Hmm.
Right. I think one example that comes to mind pretty readily is the first fight I had with my ex. Was about, we were in the grocery store. Man, why do all my stories end up in the grocery store? But we argued about ice cream. My partner wanted to buy nicer, higher quality ice cream that was more expensive, and I had always historically bought cheaper, larger quantity ice cream. And the reason I bring this up in relation to money is it wasn't until 4 or 5 years after that happened, multiple years after we broke up,
Hmm.
that I realized that that argument was about money.
Wow.
It was about money and control. And, and the
Hmm.
thing is, like, the two of us shared a lot of our money values, and they had already spent more time understanding that they wanted more quality, and that the argument we actually had in the grocery store was all about nutrition. And what does it matter if you're getting higher quality ingredients when you're eating truly like unhealthy food, and we went around and around about this for ages. And I didn't realize later that if those two things were the same price, there wouldn't have been a conversation. I would have done whatever they wanted. And that mistake there is prioritizing money over the people in my life, right? And not just being like, this relationship is more important than that money. Um, that was so I have a bunch of instances like that, but it was surprising to me how long it took me to realize that that's actually what was happening. Money is going to be a much tighter issue, right? Like when you're in survival mode, everything is a much higher stress, a much higher. And I think the thing that I wish I had known earlier is that okay, I'm very lucky in a lot of different ways, and I shouldn't squander that, right? And so like this decision about $2 for ice cream is not a good decision to become a stressor for us. And so I think there are folks who just like it's inevitable. The number one thing they have to think about and be concerned about is money. But there are a lot of us who that doesn't necessarily have to be the case, and yet it still becomes an overarching problem or stressor.
So I just want to point out, because for a lot of people, we underestimate how much asset we have. Like for most people, we have health, we have time, we have friendship. And those things are so much more important that, it's not worthwhile just to fight because of, the less important things, which is like money can go and you can make more. It's not going to, change your life significantly. That's how I feel.
Yeah, I think certainly within certain bands, right? If you're in this band and you're probably going to stay in that band, then yeah. I agree.
So since you have all the time and also the financial security, like what keeps you up at night?
It's honestly it's stuff with the tool library. So one of the things about doing work for a nonprofit and for a really small organization is that a lot of it falls to a very small number of people, and I really don't want to. I don't want to let the community down, and so I really want to position. And the community is the people who borrow from us, our volunteers, our donors, and then the people within the city who could benefit from using our services. I don't want to make a mistake that would adversely affect them, right? Like right now we're in the process of a really big move. Logistically, it's extremely complicated for us. I think in a normal company, this would have 2 or 3 people as a team working on this, mostly full time, and to try to get it to be seamless. And I don't, it's a big leap for us financially, and I don't want to do anything that might jeopardize the stability and sustainability of the org. But we have to make these kind of choices, and so that's the stuff that kind of keeps me up a little bit.
Wow, it's amazing, Rick. It's amazing how you are basically puts your priority in life right now onto a library. But I also want to say, like, counterbalance that sense of heightened responsibility, like being a parent. I think that's probably the closest analogy I can make. It's basically a kid has its own personality. You can do your best, but the result is not 100% dependent on you. It's mostly on the organization or on the kid. So
you have to relinquish control, certainly,
exactly.
or understand that the outcomes aren't fully in your control. And in truth, that this hyper dedication to the library is probably a little bit of a coping mechanism too for me, right? It's not all altruistic. It's a way for me to not think about my problems and just focus on something that is a little bit more tangible, a little bit more digestible.
Definitely. We all need that fulfillment in life. But like whenever you feel you recognize that the coping mechanism is overpowering, then maybe take a step back and let me know if you need a person to, bounce off ideas stuff.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And so like how can my audience help, or how can people in Chicago help with Tool Library?
There's a bunch of different ways. The short one, the ways that I think people are most comfortable with are, volunteering and spreading the word and becoming members. We have a really wide variety of things, and so I think there's something for everyone in the library's inventory. Um, and with the move, we have a lot of volunteer opportunities that people can find on our website. But I think it feels a little crass, but now being on the other side, I've been on the donor side, but now being on the donation recipient side, money is really, it matters a lot. And I mean, that's what we're here talking about. And the way that the US works with nonprofits it's difficult, right? For smaller, younger nonprofits, it's hard to get large grant funding. It's, and the scale you need to take on is really hugely different. We're not the American Cancer Fund, which has departments for fundraising. We have a few random people who volunteer their time to write grants or write solicitations to people. And yeah, so at the end of the day, the money ends up really mattering. And the thing that I think might hearten people is that we've done a lot with very little. And
I can testify that. I've seen the past 3 years.
Yeah. And so, we really do make our dollars go far, and the impact that we're having is huge. I think our recent numbers, like we've saved Chicagoans like $750,000 in just over 3 years in what would have been tool purchases and rentals.
Yep.
And that's barely scratching the surface. That's in the middle of a pandemic without able to do any marketing. With just a little bit of a push, I think we can really become this kind of community institution if we do it right.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. You have a great vision, and I can totally see. I can't wait to see how Tool Library grows into in the next 3 years. To our audience, if you're in Chicago, definitely check out Chicago Tool Library and volunteer for the move. If you have the money, maybe donate, and every dollar counts. So thank you. If you can go back in time, what would you say to the Vivek 5 years ago?
Oh, so many things I would say to him. 5 years ago, I would have still been at my old job. I would have started by telling him to be a little bit braver, right? And some of that is about recognizing what position I was in. And, with my expenses as low as they were, that I could have afforded to take a risk at that time. And then the other one is obviously, I think, related to that, what I described as a money failure for me is I guess it's also related to that braveness, is just being a little bit more aware of how much I was letting money and optimizing for money make decisions for me rather than being kind of an active participant in those choices. And I think that would have eased a lot of stress for me and reduced harm for people around me. That's what I would have tried to tell him to focus on.
Is anything getting better today? Now you realize that and wiser?
Sometimes, yeah, absolutely. There are definitely moments where it's not as painful to spend money. I'm not bringing in an income. And so, seeing that dollar amount always going down is nerve wracking, but just trying to step back, take a bigger look at the picture, recognizing how fortunate I am. So now sometimes I don't agonize over getting takeout for $10 or, whatever. I still haven't fully mustered the courage to go to the corner store for ice cream because I'm not willing to pay $7 for a pint. But to tie that story up, I actually do now buy the higher quality, more expensive ice cream. I wait for it to go on sale, but that is what I buy now.
I like that. We all grow. I'm curious, would you ever consider going back to the paid work career?
I would. And I'm I think I'm basically forced to. I don't have enough money to live forever by any means, and so I will have to do that. I think the challenge I'm going to face is I'm going to need a very specific kind of work environment and a type of work that feels more in line with what I want to do. It's possible that in the long run, one day I could get paid to work for the tool library, but having seen our books, I think it's going to be a while. So that's not something I'm necessarily holding out for. But yeah, one day I think it will have to happen.
Mm-hmm. And since you have the experience like creating something out of nothing, like would you open your own business or start anything new?
It's interesting. I've always thought I wanted to start my own business. I think that comes a lot for people who have too much confidence and just a little bit of ability. And this, I think, tells me that no, I probably wouldn't start my own thing. Interestingly, I've seen what it takes, so I came in shortly after it started, but I've seen what our two co-founders, Tessa and Jim, and what it takes. And it's not that it takes something that I could never possess, but it's the skill set is just slightly different and the mentality is slightly different. I think I'm really good to bring in shortly after starting, but it takes a lot more courage and a lot more belief and risk taking, I think, to start that initial thing, even for something that isn't going to necessarily cost you money. It's not like it's a huge investment, but I think it's low likelihood. I might join someone else or help them out, but I don't know that I would start my own.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very different mentality and skill set. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to take the interview. And I really enjoyed learning your different perspective. And I wish you all the best in your future endeavors.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And also to your viewers, Prudence has helped the tool library a lot out with her guidance on our financials and our bookkeeping. And we're really appreciative to all the work she's done for us. And I hope that this keeps going well for you.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
I hope Vivek's story helped you gain a different perspective on how to live a happy and fulfilling life. If you have stories to share, please let me know by filling out the form in the pinned comment below. And if you want more stories and strategies to live the life you want, please don't forget to subscribe to Invest with Prudence. We upload new episodes every week. We're also available on your favorite podcast platform under Invest with Prudence. See you next time!